Chapter 7 of Book 11 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. Translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 7. But since also the case stands thus, and if it be not so, things will spring from night, and from all things simultaneously, and from nonentity, these aforesaid questions may be decided, and something always would there be that is being moved with a motion that is incessant, but this is that which is circular, and this is evident not merely from reason, but from the fact itself. Wherefore the first heaven would be eternal. There is therefore also something that imparts motion. Since, however, that which has motion impressed upon it, and which imparts motion, subsists as a medium, there is therefore something which, not having motion impressed upon it, yet imparts motion, which is a thing that is eternal, being both substance and energy. But in this way it imparts motion, I mean, that which is desirable and that which is intelligible impart motion, whereas they are not moved themselves. But the originals of these are the same, for a thing that is the object of a propension is that which appears fair, but a thing which is originally selected from volition actually is fair. Now, we desire a thing because it appears fair, rather than that a thing appears fair because we desire it. For the perception constitutes a first principle, but mind is moved by that which is intelligible, and the other co-ordination constitutes essentially that which is intelligible, and belonging to this is the first substance, and of this is that substance which subsists absolutely and according to energy. Unity, however, is not the same with what is simple or absolute. For unity signifies measure, but what is absolute signifies the mode in which a thing itself subsists. But, certainly, both that which is fair, and that which is desirable for its own sake, belong to the same coordinate series, and that which is first is the most excellent invariably, or amounts to that which is analogous to it. But that the final cause subsists in things that are immovable, the division makes manifest. For the final cause of anything resides in those things of which the one is in existence and the other is not. Now, that which first imparts motion does so as a thing that is loved, and that which has motion impressed upon it imparts motion to other things. If indeed, therefore, anything is being moved, it is admissible also that it should subsist in a different manner. Wherefore, if the primary motion constitute energy also, so far forth as the thing is moved, in this way is it likewise possible that it should subsist after a different mode, in place though not in substance. Since, however, there is something that imparts motion, itself being immovable, and subsisting in energy, this does not by any means admit of subsisting in a different manner. For the primary motion belongs to the changes, and of this that which is circular, but this first mover imparts motion to that. Of necessity, in this case, must this immovable first mover constitute an entity, and so far forth as it subsists necessarily, so far forth does it subsist after an excellent manner, and in this way constitutes a first principle. For what is necessary subsists in thus many ways, in the first place by what is accomplished by violence, because it is contrary to free will, and secondly, as that without which a thing does not subsist in an excellent manner, and thirdly, as that which could not be otherwise from what it is, but involves an absolute subsistence. From a first principle, then, of this kind, I mean one that is involved in the assumption of a first mover, hath depended the heaven and nature. Now, the course of life of this first mover, in like manner with our own, for a limited period of time, is such also as is the most excellent, for in the present instance doth that first mover continue in the enjoyment of the principle of life for ever. For with us certainly such a thing as this would be impossible, but not so with the first mover, since even doth the energy or activity of this first mover give rise unto pleasure or satisfaction on the part of such, and on this account vigilance, exercise of the senses, and perception in general are what is most productive of pleasure or satisfaction, and with hopes and recollections is the case the same for these reasons. Now, essential perception is the perception of that which is essentially the most excellent, and that which is most essential perception is the perception of that which is most essential. The mind, however, is cognizant of itself by participation in that which falls within the province of the mind as its object, for it becomes an object of perception by contact, and by an act of intellectual apprehension. So that the mind, and that which is an object of perception for the mind, are the same. For that which is receptive of impressions from what is an object of perception, and is substance, constitutes mind, and when in possession of these impressions it energizes, or subsists in a condition of activity. Wherefore, that seems to belong to the first mover rather than to the mind of man, and it is a divine prerogative which the mind appears to possess, and contemplation constitutes what is most agreeable and excellent. If, therefore, God in this way possesses such an excellent mode of subsistence for ever, as we do for a limited period of duration, the divine nature is admirable, and if he possesses it in a more eminent degree, still more admirable will be the divine nature. In this way, however, is the deity disposed as to existence, and the principle of life is, at any rate, inherent in the deity. For the energy or active exercise of mind constitutes life, and God, as above delineated, constitutes this energy, and essential energy belongs to God as his best and everlasting life. Now, our statement is this, that the deity is an animal that is everlasting, and most excellent in nature, so that with the deity, life and duration are uninterrupted and eternal, for this constitutes the very essence of God. As many philosophers, however, as adopt the supposition, such as the Pythagoreans and Speusippus, that what is best and most fair is not to be found in the principle of things, from the fact that though the first principles, both of plants and animals, are causes, yet that what is fair and perfect resides in created things, as results from these. Persons, I say, who entertain these sentiments do not form their opinions correctly. For seed arises from other natures that are antecedent and perfect, and seed is not the first thing, whereas that which is perfect is, as, for example, just as if one were to say that a man is antecedent to seed, not the man that is being generated from seed, but another from whom the seed flows. That, indeed, there exists a certain eternal substance, and a substance that is immovable, and possesses actually a subsistence separable from sensibles, is evident from the statements that have been made above. But it also has been demonstrated that it is not possible for this substance to involve any magnitude, but it is devoid of parts and indivisible. For it imparts motion throughout infinite duration, and nothing that is finite involves infinite potentiality. Since, however, every magnitude is either infinite or finite, for this reason such a substance as the above would not involve a finite magnitude, and therefore it cannot involve an infinite magnitude, because, in short, there is no infinite magnitude in existence. But unquestionably also it has been demonstrated that such is impassive and unalterable, for all other motions are subsequent to that motion which is local or topical. These statements, therefore, make it evident why it is that the Deity is disposed as to existence after this manner. Chapter 8. Now, whether are we to admit that there exists one substance of this description or many? And if so, how many such there are ought not to escape our notice. But we should call to remembrance also the assertions of other philosophers, because regarding the multitude of these substances they have not spoken aught which amounts to even anything that is clear in the expression. For indeed, the opinion in regard of ideas does not involve any peculiar investigation, for the persons who affirm the existence of ideas affirm that these ideas are numbers. And as regards numbers, at one time they speak of them as of things that are infinite, and at other times as of things that are limited, as far as to the decade. As to the cause, however, why it is that there subsists a multitude of numbers of this kind, nothing is expressed by them with demonstrative certainty. This, however, must we declare from principles that are taken for granted, and that have been determined. For the first principle, and the original existence of entities, is a thing that is immovable, both essentially and according to accident, and it imparts motion with an original and eternal and single motion. But since that which is being moved must needs derive its motion from something, and that which first imparts motion is essentially immovable, and an eternal motion derives that motion from what is eternal as a moving cause, and a single motion its motion from what is single, and since we see that beside the simple revolutionary motion of the universe, which we say derives its motion from the first substance, and that which is immovable, there are other motions that are everlasting, namely, those of the planets. For eternal and unstable in its movement is a body that is circular, but we have furnished demonstrations in regard of these in our Physics. Now, I say, since the foregoing is the case, each of these motions must needs derive its motion from that which is both immovable essentially and is an eternal substance. For the nature of the stars consists in being a certain eternal substance, and that which imparts motion is eternal, and is antecedent to that which has motion impressed upon it, and that which involves priority of subsistence to a substance must needs also be a substance. It is evident, therefore, that it is expedient that there should be in existence substances of this kind, such as are both naturally eternal, as well as essentially immovable and devoid of magnitude, and that, too, on account of the cause that has been stated previously. That indeed, therefore, these substances are in existence, and which of these is primary, and which of them is secondary, according to the same order, with the orbital motions of the stars, is evident. But at present must we discover the multitude of these orbital motions from that department of the philosophy of the mathematical sciences which is most appropriately devoted to this purpose, I mean from astronomy. For this science institutes an investigation respecting a substance that is cognizant by sense, no doubt, but such as is eternal. The rest of the mathematical sciences, however, are not concerned about any substance whatever. For example, take the case of the science respecting numbers and geometry. That, therefore, there are numerous orbital motions belonging to the stars that are being moved across the arch of heaven is evident to those who have even moderately busied themselves in such inquiries. For more motions than one do each of the planetary stars assume. But as to how many these happen to be, let us likewise now declare the statements which some of the mathematicians make on this subject. for the purpose of understanding the point under investigation, in order that it may be possible to apprehend a certain multitude of these when mentally defined. But as to what remains, we must ourselves investigate into some points, but we must make inquiries into others from persons engaged in investigations into these subjects, if, haply, anything beside the statements that already have been made may appear to those who are busied in these speculations. And, if so, we should bestow affection upon both, yet yield our assent only to those who are more accurate. Eudoxus, in his system, therefore, laid down the orbital motion of the sun and moon to be severally in 3 spheres, the first of which he maintained was that of the fixed stars, and the second was that which accords with the circle which passes through the central signs of the zodiac, and the third with that circle which is situated obliquely in the latitude of the zodiacal signs. Now, that oblique circle through which the moon is carried is situated in a wider latitude than that through which the sun is carried. But of the devious or erratic stars he makes a disposition of each in 4 spheres, and of these, likewise, he considers the first and second to be the same with those of the sun and moon. For the sphere of the fixed stars, according to him, is the same with that first sphere which carries along all the orbs, and that which has been arranged under this, and possesses a motion corresponding with the circle that passes through the central signs of the zodiac, he considers a sphere common to all these heavenly bodies. He is of opinion, however, that the poles of the third sphere, which is common to all, are situated in that circle which passes through the central signs of the zodiac, and that the motion of the fourth sphere is in an orbit declining towards the centre of the third, and that the poles of the third sphere are the proper poles of the other spheres, but that Venus and Mercury have the same poles. Callippus, however, sets down the same disposition of the spheres with Eudoxus, that is, the same arrangement of their mutual distances, but with respect to their multitude he ascribed to the star of Jupiter, as well as to that of Saturn, the same number with Eudoxus. Yet still he thinks that to the luminary of the sun, and to that of the moon, there should further be annexed 2 spheres, that is, supposing one likely to furnish a solution of the phenomena. And in regard of the other spheres of the planets, he adds 1 sphere to each. It is necessary, however, on the supposition that all, when collected together, are likely to furnish a solution of the phenomena, that according to each of the erratic stars there should be different spheres revolving less by one than those which carry along the planets, and, in regard of position, restore into the same place the first sphere invariably of the star which is ranked in an inferior order. For in this way only is it possible that by the orbital motion of the planets should be produced all the phenomena that may be observed. Since, therefore, as regards the spheres in which the planets are carried along, some of them are made to amount to 8, but others to 5 and 20, and of these it is not necessary that those merely should have revolving spheres in which a star arranged lowest down is carried. Those, accordingly, that impart a revolutionary motion to the spheres of the 2 first will be 6 in number, while those to the spheres of the 4 subsequent stars will be 11. The total amount of all the spheres, however, as well those that carry along the stars, as also those that make them revolve, will be 50 and 5. But if one were not to add the motions of the moon, which we have mentioned to the sun also, all the spheres will be 40 and 7. Let the number, then, of the spheres amount to so many, wherefore it is reasonable to suppose that both the substances and the first principles which are immovable, and are cognizant by the senses, should be so many in number as we have enumerated. For then there must necessarily be such a number as this. Let it be left to those to decide who are endued with greater ability to declare their sentiments on such points. If, however, it is not possible that there should be any orbital motion which does not contribute towards the orbital motion of a star, And further, if it is requisite to suppose that every nature and every substance ought to be regarded, provided it be devoid of passion and be essential, as having attained the most excellent end, in this case there would not be in existence any other nature independent of these. But it is necessary that this should constitute the total amount of substances. For whether there should be others, they would impart motion, as being an end of orbital motion. But, at any rate, it is impossible that there should be other orbital motions beside those that have been enumerated, and this supposition it would be reasonable to arrive at from observing the bodies that are being moved along the surface of the heavens. For, on the supposition that everything that is borne along the firmament subsists by the constitution of nature, on account of that body which is borne along, and that every motion belongs to something that is carried forward, there would not exist any orbital motion on account of itself, or of another motion, but on account of the stars would it exist. For if we admit that orbital motion will subsist on account of motion of the same sort, it will be requisite that this latter, likewise, should subsist on account of other orbital motions, so that, since it is not also possible to go on in a progression to infinity, an end of every orbital motion will be some one of those divine bodies that are borne along the surface of the heaven. That, however, there is one heaven is evident. For if there were many heavens, as there are men, in regard of each will there be such a first principle as is one in species, but in number many at least. Such things, however, as are many in number, involve a connexion with matter. For there is one and the same mode of reasoning applicable to the case of many. Take the instance of a man. Yet Socrates is one. But that which ranks as first amongst formal causes does not involve a connexion with matter, for it subsists in actuality. Accordingly, in both reason and number, that which primarily imparts motion is immovable, and that which has motion impressed upon it in this case is always and uninterruptedly one thing merely. Such being true, there is consequently in existence one solitary heaven. Traditions, however, have been handed down from our predecessors and the very ancient philosophers, and left to their posterity in the form of a myth, to the effect that these many heavens, supposing them to exist, both are gods, and that the divinity encompasses the entire of nature. And the remainder of these traditions, in the present day, have been brought forward, clothed in a fabulous garb, for the purpose of winning the assent of the multitude, and enforcing the utility that is urged in favour of the laws, and of general expediency. For they speak of these as subsisting in the form of the human species, and as being like in appearance to certain of the rest of the animal kingdom, and other statements consequential upon these, and similar to those that have been declared, do they put forward. Now, if, as regards these traditions, any one, having separated this from amongst the others, may receive merely the first assertion, namely, that they supposed the first substances to be gods, he would consider that this statement had been made after a divine manner, and in accordance with what is to be expected in the discovery, as frequently as is consistent with possibility, as well of every art as of every system of philosophy. And in the loss of these again, he must conclude that likewise these opinions of those very ancient philosophers, as relics, have been preserved up to the time of the present day. This opinion, therefore, of our forefathers, and that which has been traditionally handed down from the very earliest speculators, is evident to us thus far, and no more. Chapter 9. There are points, however, respecting mind, which involve certain subjects of doubt. For it seems certainly to constitute the most divine existence amongst phenomena. But after what manner it is disposed, so as that it should be a thing of this sort, is attended with certain difficulties. For whether it be void of the faculty of understanding anything, but is like one who is sleeping, what, may I ask, would there be reverential in such a condition of being? Or, supposing that it possesses the faculty of understanding, and yet that there be something which is dominant over this faculty, for in this case that which is its substance is not intelligence, but capacity. Should the foregoing be true, we could not say that mind would be the most excellent substance, for it is through the faculty of the understanding that that which is entitled to reverence is inherent in the mind. But, further, whether understanding constitute its substance, or whether perception does, what, may I ask, does it understand? For either it is itself that it understands, or something else. And, supposing that it understands something else, either it will invariably be the same, or something different. Whether, then, is there any difference, or no difference at all, between its understanding what is fair, and understanding what is casual? Or, also, would it be an absurd idea to imagine that it exercises the faculty of cognition in regard of certain things? It is evident, therefore, that that which understands is most divine, and most entitled to reverence, and that it undergoes no change. For change would presuppose a transition into something that is worse. And a thing of this sort would, in the present instance, amount to a certain motion. In the first place, then, of course, supposing that the mind were not perception or intelligence, but capacity, it is reasonable to infer that continuity of perception would be a laborious operation for the mind. And, in the next place, it is evident that there would be in existence something else that is more entitled to reverence than mind, namely, that which is an object of perception to the mind. For both the faculty of understanding and actual perception will be present to the mind, even in its understanding that which is most inferior. So that we must avoid this consequence. For also would it be better not to see some things than to see them. Hence perception would not constitute that which is most excellent. Accordingly, may we assume that mind is cognizant of its own operations, if it really is that which is most superior, and if perception amounts to the perception of a perception. Now, scientific knowledge invariably appears as well as perception by sense and opinion, and the faculty of thought, to be conversant about something different from itself, and to be conversant about itself only in a secondary or subordinate sense. Further, if we suppose that understanding is different from being an object of perception to the understanding, according to which of these will subsistence in an excellent way be inherent in mind? For neither is it the same thing the being inherent in an act of perception by the understanding, and in an object of perception to the understanding. Or shall we say that in the case of some things the science constitutes itself that which is the object of the science? In the case, I admit, of the productive sciences, the substance and the essence do not involve a connection with matter, whereas in the case of the speculative sciences, the definition or formal principle is the object of the science, as well as is the perception exercised by the mind. Inasmuch, then, as the object of the understanding is not a different thing from the understanding itself, in the case of as many things as do not involve a connection with matter, they will be the same thing, and the act of perception by the mind will be identical with the object of perception. Moreover, therefore, a doubt remains whether an object of perception is a composite nature or not. For if this be the case, the object of perception, as a compound, would undergo a change in the parts of the entire. Or shall we say that everything is indivisible which does not involve a connection with matter, as the human mind? Or are we to take for granted that the perception of compound objects involves a connection with matter during a certain portion of duration? For an excellent condition of subsistence does not always reside in this particular thing or in that, but that which is most excellent subsists in a thing, viewed as a certain entirety, being something different from itself, and therefore the first and actual perception by mind of mind itself doth subsist in this way throughout all eternity. Chapter 10. But we must also consider in what manner the nature of the entire creation involves what is good and what is most excellent, whether there exists something that has been separated in point of fact, and which actually subsists essentially, or whether we are to assume the existence of order, or make both of these assumptions together, just as we might illustrate our meaning by the case of an army. For the good or excellent condition of an army depends upon the order that is enforced, and the commander who aims to promote this subordination. Even this person, in a more eminent degree, may be regarded as a cause of such an excellent condition, for this officer is not set over the army on account of the order that is found to prevail there, but that order is found to exist on account of the command exercised by this officer. All things, however, are coordinated after a certain mode, but not after a similar mode. Take the classification, for example, of aquatic and winged animals, and of plants. And they are not disposed after such a way as that there should not subsist anything in common to either in relation to the other, although in respect of some point do they involve some resemblance. For indeed, in regard of one characteristic are all things ranked under coordinate series, but as in a house it is allowable, least of all, for the free to do anything whatsoever they please, but all things, or most things, have been reduced into a state of orderly arrangement, so to slaves likewise and wild beasts, only in a small degree belongs a desire to do what may contribute to the general advantage. But for the most part their operations are confined to whatsoever chances to fall in their way, for the nature of each of them constitutes to them a first principle of this description. But I say in this instance that it is requisite for all to attain unto a condition where distinctions will be drawn, and other things subsist in this way, of which all participate for the constitution or preservation of the entire. But whatever impossibilities or absurdities ensue to those who make assertions in a different way, and what sort of theories those put forward on the subject who express themselves in a more elegant or accomplished manner, and in the case of which of these there prevail the least number of doubts, we must not allow such inquiries to escape our observation. For all philosophers are for producing all things from contraries. Neither, however, is the expression, quote, all things, close quote, nor the expression, quote, from contraries, close quote, correctly employed by these speculators, nor do they declare, as regards those things in which the contraries are inherent, in what manner they will consist of contraries, for contraries are mutually impassive. But by us is this controversy decided rationally by the introduction of a certain third nature. Some, however, constitute some one of the contraries as matter, just as those do who make the odd subject for the even, or plurality for unity. And this likewise is decided in the same manner, for the matter which is one is not what is contrary to anything. Further, all things except unity will participate in what is worthless, for the evil itself constitutes one or other of the elements. The other speculators assert, however, that neither what is good and what is evil are first principles at all, notwithstanding that what is good is in a most eminent degree a first principle in all things. And some, I admit, correctly make this assertion of what is good. I mean, that we must consider it a first principle. After what mode, however, it is that what is good constitutes a first principle, they do not state, whether it is to be regarded as an end, or as a moving cause, or as a formal principle. Now, Empedocles also forms his opinions absurdly upon this point, for he makes harmony to constitute what is good, and this harmony, in his system, subsists even as a first principle that imparts motion, for it has the power of congregating entities, and it subsists as matter, for it is a portion of the mixture. Now, even on the supposition that to harmony has it happened in this same system that it should subsist as matter, and a first principle, and as a power that imparts motion, yet the essence of this is not the same with the essence of these, according to which of them, therefore, will harmony subsist? And that discord should be a thing that is incorruptible would be absurd likewise, and yet this very thing constitutes the nature of what is evil. But Anaxagoras regarded what is good as a first principle, so far as it is a power that imparts motion, for mind in his system imparts motion. It imparts motion, however, for the sake of something else. Wherefore that is different from that for the sake of which it subsists, except it subsists as we say it actually does, for the medicinal art, in a manner, constitutes health. But it was also an absurdity contained in the Anaxagorean philosophy, the not having produced a contrary to what is good as well as to mind. But all who assert contraries to be first principles do not employ contraries as such, unless one is disposed to handle the subject in a careless vein. And why is it that some things are corruptible and some things incorruptible, no one declares, for they produce all entities from the same first principles. Further, some of these speculators produce entities from what is non-entity, but some, that they may not be forced to this, make all things to be one. Further, no one lays down a reason why generation will always exist, and what the cause of generation is, nobody declares. And for those who create two first principles, will it be necessary to have a different first principle, which would be more dominant, as well as for those philosophers who introduce forms, because there really exists another principle more dominant than these. For why has matter participated, or why does it participate in these ideas? And for others it is necessary that there should be something that is contrary to wisdom, and to that which is the science most entitled to reverence. But to us this is not necessary, for there is nothing contrary to what is primary. For all the contraries involve matter, and these subsist in capacity. But contrary ignorance is opposed to what is contrary, yet nothing is contrary to what is primary. Further, on the supposition that there do not exist other things beside those that are cognizant by the senses, there will not subsist a first principle, and order, and generation, and the celestial bodies will have no existence. But there is always a first principle of the principle, just as we find in the systems of theologians and all natural philosophers. Now, admitting that there will be forms, or numbers, they will not constitute a cause of anything. And if they are not a cause of anything, neither will they be a cause of motion at any rate. Further, how, let me ask, will magnitude and continuity arise from things that are devoid of magnitude? For number will not produce a continuous quantity, either as that which imparts motion, or as form. But certainly there will not be anything, at least, belonging to the contraries, which is both productive and motive, for it would admit of non-existence. But surely the energy or producing cause is subsequent to the capacity, and in such a case eternal entities do not exist, but yet they do exist. Accordingly, some one of these hypotheses must be rejected, and this has been declared in the above statement that capacity antecedes energy, as to how it must be accomplished. Further, in what way numbers may be one, or soul and body, and in general, form and the thing itself, no one says anything on this point, nor is it possible that one should declare his sentiments thereupon, unless he express himself as we do, namely, to the effect that it is the cause which imparts motion that is the agent of production. But they who say that mathematical number is the first, and in this way continually suppose the existence of another substance adhering thereto in succession, and of different first principles belonging unto each, these make the substance of the universe to be adventitious. For in no wise does one substance contribute anything towards another, as to whether it exists or does not exist, and besides this they introduce many first principles. The entities, however, do not choose to submit to injudicious government. Quote, the government of many is not a good thing. Let there be one ruler. Close quote. End of chapter 10 and end of book 11. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Of Book 12 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. Respecting indeed, therefore, the substance of things that are cognizant by the senses, it has been declared what it is in the mode of inquiry adopted by natural philosophers in their theories concerning matter, and subsequently in our own treatise in regard of matter in a condition of energy or activity. Since, however, our present investigation has for its object to ascertain whether besides sensible substances there is in existence a certain substance that is immovable and eternal, or there is not, and, on the supposition of the existence of any such, what it is, in the first place we must take a glance at the assertions made by other speculators, in order that, if they happen to make any assertion not after a correct manner, we may not become entangled in the same errors, and that if there subsists any dogma in common between ourselves and them, we may not be indignant with it as a thing peculiarly in opposition to our present design. For it is a thing that we should remain content with, if one should make some statements with more propriety, but others in a way no wise inferior to ourselves. Now there are two opinions respecting these subjects, for certain philosophers affirm that mathematical entities are substances, such, for example, as numbers and lines, and those things that are kindred to these, and, again, that ideas are existences of this description. Since, however, some speculators constitute these as two distinct genera, I mean both the ideas and the mathematical numbers, and others maintain in opposition that there is one nature of both, and certain other philosophers say that mathematical entities are alone substances, in the first place we must institute an investigation respecting mathematical entities, without annexing to them any other nature, as, for instance, might or might not be the case, according to whether they happen to be ideas or not, and whether these are first principles and substances of entities or not. But as regards mathematical entities, attending to this point merely, whether they possess a subsistence or do not, and if they do, after what mode they subsist. In the next place, after these inquiries, we shall, apart by itself, institute an investigation concerning the ideas themselves, simply considered, and as much for the sake of usage as anything else. For most of the tenets of what relates to these inquiries have been divulged even by exoteric discourses respecting them. Further also, in regard of that particular form of investigation, it is necessary that we encounter a more enlarged philosophic discussion when we come to be engaged in our inquiries as to whether the substances and first principles of entities are numbers and ideas. For, after the investigation relating to ideas, this one remains as a third subject for inquiry. But it is requisite, on the supposition of the existence of mathematical entities, that these should reside either in objects that fall under the notice of the senses, as certain affirm, or that they should involve a subsistence separable from sensibles. And some make a statement in this way. Or, if they are not inherent in either one or the other, they either have no existence at all, or exist in some different manner. Wherefore, the question with us will not be concerning the existence of mathematical entities, but concerning their mode of existence. Chapter 2. That indeed, therefore, it is impossible that these mathematical entities should reside in objects that are cognizant by the senses, and that at the same time the reason assigned for this position is a fictitious one, has been declared also in the Doubts, where we have proved that it is impossible that there should be two solids in the same place at the same time. And further also, it depends on the same course of reasoning, both that other potentialities and natures should reside in sensibles, and that no one of them should possess a separable subsistence. These things, then, have been already declared. But, in addition to these statements, it is evident that it is impossible that any body whatsoever should be divided. For it will be divided according to a superficies, and this according to a line, and a line according to a point. Wherefore, supposing that it is impossible to divide a point, it is also impossible to divide a line. And if it is impossible to divide a line, the case is the same with the other mathematical quantities likewise. What, therefore, is the difference in allowing either that natures of this description should exist, or that these do not exist at all, but that such natures should be found in sensibles? For the same consequence will ensue. For on the supposition of a division of the sensibles, they also will be divided, or they will not be of the nature of sensibles. But the fact is, neither is it possible that such natures should be actually, at least, separated. For if independent of such as are cognizant by the senses, there should exist other solids that are actually in a condition of separation therefrom, and which are antecedent to those that are cognizant by sense, it is evident that it is also necessary that besides surfaces there should exist other surfaces that involve a separable subsistence, and in like manner other points and lines, for this deduction rests upon the same reasoning. And if these points be admitted again, in addition to the surfaces and lines and points of a mathematical solid, there will be different ones subsisting in a separate condition. For incomposite natures are antecedent to those that are composite, and if antecedent to sensibles, there exist bodies which do not fall under the notice of the senses. By the same reasoning, those very surfaces which subsist essentially will likewise be antecedent to those surfaces that are to be found in immovable solids. Wherefore, those surfaces and lines are different from those which at the same time are inherent in separated solids. For the latter indeed are capable of consubsistence with mathematical solids, but the former are antecedent to mathematical solids. Again, therefore, there will be lines belonging to these surfaces prior to which there will needs be different lines and points for the same reason. And of those points contained in the lines that have an antecedent subsistence, to those cognizant by sense, there will be other prior points to which there will no longer belong different ones that have this prior subsistence. Wherefore also such an accumulation as the foregoing would be absurd. For it happens that independent of such as fall under the notice of the senses, there subsist single solids, no doubt. Yet that there are three ranks of surfaces beside those that are cognizant by the senses, and that one of these subsists beside those that are sensible, and that the second resides in mathematical solids, and that the third subsists beside those sensibles that are inherent in these, and that there exists a fourfold classification of lines, and that there are 5 ranks of points. Wherefore, let me ask respecting which of these will the mathematical sciences be conversant? For undoubtedly they are not conversant respecting the surfaces and lines and points that are resident in an immovable solid. For a science is always conversant about subjects that involve a priority of subsistence. And the same reasoning holds good respecting numbers also. For beside each of the points will there exist other monads, and beside each of the entities that fall under the notice of sense, next in order will subsist those that are objects of perception for the mind. Wherefore, there will exist infinite genera of mathematical numbers. Further, how is it possible that we should decide the questions of controversy which we have taken a review of in the doubts enumerated above? For the objects about which astronomy is conversant will in like manner be different from those that are cognizant by sense, and this will be the case too with those particulars about which geometry is concerned. But let me ask the question how it is possible that heaven and the parts thereof subsist, or any other thing whatsoever that involves motion. And the case stands the same in regard of those objects that pertain unto optics and harmonics. For there will exist both voice and a power of vision in addition to the things that fall beneath the notice of our senses, and to singulars. Wherefore it is evident that there will be in existence both other senses and other objects of the senses. For why, may I ask, should these exist rather than those? If, however, these do exist, there will also be in existence other animals, if the truth be that also there are other senses. Further, are some things described by the mathematicians as universal in addition to these substances. Therefore, will this also constitute a certain other separated substance, intermediate between both ideas and media, and which will be neither number, nor points, nor magnitude, nor duration. But if this is impossible, it is evident that it is impossible that those natures also should be separated from sensibles. Now, the short of the matter is this, that the very contrary takes place both to what is in fact true, and habitually supposed to be true, if one will in this way seek to establish the existence of mathematical entities as certain natures possessed of a separated subsistence. For it is necessary, from the fact of the subsistence of these in this manner, that they should be antecedent to magnitudes that are cognizant by the senses, when yet in reality they are subsequent to them. For an imperfect magnitude is prior in generation, but subsequent in substance, in the same way as what is inanimate is prior to that which is animated. Further, in what way also at all will these mathematical magnitudes be one? And when will this be the case? For the things, of course, that are here reside in the soul, or a portion of the soul, or in something else that is endowed with reason. And if this be not the case, many things are exposed to dissolution. But now, what is the cause of those things which are divisible and pertaining to quantity being one, and remaining in conjunction with one another as such? Further, do generations make this evident? For in the first place, no doubt, such make a transition into what pertains unto length, in the next place into what pertains unto breadth, and lastly into what relates to depth, and has reached an end. If, therefore, that which is subsequent in generation may be antecedent in substance, corporeity would be antecedent to a surface and a length, and will be both perfect and an entirety in this way in preference, because it is rendered a thing that is animated. But how, one may ask, would a line or a surface become animated? For such an axiom as this would be above the grasp of our senses. Further, it is true, corporeity constitutes a certain substance, for already doth it in a manner involve that which is perfect. But how are lines said to be substances? For neither are they substances in the same manner as species, and a certain form. For example, if in such a case we should admit that soul were a thing of this sort, nor are they substances in the same way as matter. For instance, take the case of body as a thing of this description, for nothing appears as endued with a capacity of consisting either from lines or surfaces or points. But supposing that it were a certain material substance, this would appear as one that is endued with a capacity of assuming passive states. In definition, then, granting that mathematical natures will be antecedent to sense, yet it does not follow that all things whatsoever that are prior in definition should be prior also in substance. For those things that are prior in substance indeed are whatsoever things which, involving a separate subsistence, are transcendent in their essence. But all those things are prior in definition, of which there are definitions compounded of definitions. These, however, are not inherent at the same time. For if there are not in existence passive conditions, independent of the substances to which they belong, as, for example, a something that has motion imparted to it, or which is white, whiteness will be prior to a white man, and will be prior in accordance with the definition, but not in accordance with the substance. For it does not admit of a separate subsistence, but it always subsists in conjunction with a thing in its entirety. Now, I mean by entirety a man, for instance, who is white. Wherefore it is evident that neither is that prior which subsists by abstraction, nor is that subsequent which subsists by addition. For by addition is a man styled white by reason of whiteness. That indeed, therefore, neither are mathematical entities in a greater degree existences than bodies, and that they are not antecedent in their essence to those objects that fall under the notice of the senses, but are so merely in point of definition, and that it is not possible that they should be made to involve a separate subsistence in any place, has been declared with sufficient clearness. Since, however, neither in sensibles is it possible for these to subsist, it is evident that either, in short, they have no existence at all, or they subsist after some mode or other, and on this account not simply do they exist, for existence we predicate multifariously. Chapter 3. For, in the same manner also as universals in mathematics are not conversant about things that have been separated, and in this condition of separation subsist independent of magnitudes and numbers, but are concerned about these, but not so far forth as they are things of such a kind as to involve magnitude, or to be divisible, it is evident that there is a possibility of their likewise being in existence both definitions and demonstrations respecting those magnitudes which fall under the notice of our senses, not, however, so far forth as they are things cognizable by sense, but so far forth as they are universals. For in like manner as, also, so far forth as things are in motion merely, there are many formal principles of them, independent of the essence of each of the things of this sort, and of their accidents. And since there is no necessity, on account of these things, either that there should exist anything that is being moved in a condition of actual separation from sensibles, or that there should be in things that are such as these any separated nature at all, so therefore, likewise, in the case of things that are being moved, will there be rational principles and sciences. Not, however, so far forth as they are things that are in motion, but so far forth as they are bodies merely, and again, so far forth as they are surfaces merely, and so far forth as they are lengths merely, and so far as they are divisible, and so far as they are indivisible, and things which involve position, and so far forth as they are indivisible merely. Wherefore, since it is absolutely true to affirm not only that things capable of a separate subsistence exist, but also things that are not capable of this separable subsistence, as, for instance, that things in motion exist, so, as regards mathematical entities, it is absolutely true to affirm that such mathematical entities exist, and that, at any rate, they are such as they are asserted to be. And, likewise, as it is absolutely true to affirm, in respect of the rest of the sciences, that there are sciences conversant with this particular thing, and not with that which is accidental to it, for instance, that there is one of what is white, if that which is salubrious should be what is white, but so far forth as it is salubrious, yet they are not conversant with that, I say, which is salubrious, but with that to which each science of it belongs, if it is salubrious, that is, in this case with the salubrious, and if so far forth as such is a man, it is conversant with man, so also that this is the case with geometry. It does not, however, follow, even though sensibles happen to belong to those objects about which geometry is conversant, and, though it may not be conversant with them so far forth as they are sensibles, that the mathematical sciences will be concerned with objects that fall under the notice of the senses, and they will not certainly be conversant with these while there are in existence other separate natures. But many things are essentially accidental in things, as far forth as each peculiar quality of such is inherent in each, since both as far as an animal is female, and so far forth as it is male, these are its peculiar affections, although there is not anything that is female, or anything that is male, which involves a subsistence separable from animals. Wherefore also the case is the same so far forth as there are lengths merely, and so far as there are surfaces. and by so much the more as geometry is employed about those things that are prior in definition, and which are more simple, by so much the more does it involve the consideration of what is accurate. But the accurate is what is simple. Wherefore, geometry speculates into things that are without magnitude, rather than into those that are connected with magnitude, and especially are without motion. But if it contemplates motion, especially will it contemplate that motion which is primary or original, for this is most simple, and of this is that motion which is equable. And there is the same mode of reasoning both in the case of the sciences of harmonics and optics, for neither are the speculations of either carried on as far forth as the power of vision, or as far forth as voice is concerned, but as far forth as lines and numbers are the objects of inquiry, for these, of course, are the appropriate affections of those, and this is the case with mechanical science in like manner. Wherefore, if any one, admitting the existence of those things which involve a separate subsistence from accidents, makes any inquiry respecting these so far forth as they are such, he will not for this reason utter any falsehood. Just as neither does he do so when he describes anything on the earth, and says that that is the measure of a foot, which is not the measure of a foot, for not in the propositions doth the falsehood lurk. But thus would each particular be investigated in the most excellent manner, if any one, having effected, as he thought, a separation, should regard as such that which does not in reality possess a separate subsistence, as is done by the arithmetician and geometrician. For one indeed and indivisible is man, so far forth as he is man, but the arithmetician has established an indivisible one, and next he considers whether there is anything that is an accident in man, so far forth as he is indivisible. The geometrician, on the other hand, carries on speculations relative to man, neither as far forth as he is man, nor as far forth as he is indivisible, but as far forth as he is a solid. For what things, even though he were not indivisible anywhere, would be inherent in him is evident, because even without these, that which is endued with capacity admits of being inherent in this very man. Wherefore, on this account, geometricians with correctness make assertions, and discourse concerning entities, and entities have an existence, for twofold is entity, the one subsisting in actuality, and the other materially. Since, however, that which is good is different from that which is fair, for the one is always in conjunction with the method of doing a thing, but that which is fair also resides in things that are immovable, those who assert that the mathematical sciences make no affirmation about what is fair or good make a false assertion. For they do speak of these, and frame demonstrations of them in the most eminent sense of the word. For if they do not actually employ these names, they do not exhibit even the results and the reasons of these, and therefore they can hardly be said to make any assertion about them. Of what is fair, however, the most important species are order and symmetry, and that which is definite, which the mathematical sciences make manifest in a most eminent degree. And since, at least, these appear to be the causes of many things, now I mean, for example, order, and that which is a definite thing, it is evident that they would assert also the existence of a cause of this description, and its subsistence after the same manner as that which is fair subsists in. We will, however, declare our sentiments in regard of these points in a more intelligible form elsewhere. Chapter 4. Respecting indeed, therefore, mathematical natures, that they are entities, and how far they are entities, and how in one respect they are not antecedent to sense, and how in another they are antecedent, let thus much suffice to have been said on this subject. Concerning ideas, however, we must in the first instance examine into the actual opinion in regard of the idea which would not in any degree connect it with the nature of numbers, but in accordance with the hypothesis that has prevailed from the earliest age amongst those who originally were the first to affirm the existence of ideas. The opinion, however, in regard of forms, happened to be adopted by those who make assertions in this way, on account of their being persuaded, respecting the reality of this dogma, by the arguments adduced by Heraclitus, to show that all entities that fall under the notice of the senses are in a state of continual flux. Wherefore, if there are systems of science, and of practical wisdom, conversant about anything, we affirm that some different natures, in a condition of permanence, must necessarily exist beside those that are cognizant by the senses. For it is plain that a science of those things that are in a state of flux has no existence. Now, seeing that Socrates was engaged in forming systems in regard of the ethical or moral virtues, and was the first to institute an investigation in regard of the universal definition of these, for, to be sure, Democritus, to a small extent, merely busied himself in physical inquiries, and defined after what mode that which is hot, and that which is cold, subsisted. But the Pythagoreans, previously to his time, brought forward definitions in respect of some few things, the formal principles of which these philosophers connected with numbers, as, for example, take the instance, what opportunity constitutes, or justice, or marriage. Socrates, notwithstanding, I say, from time to time investigated into quiddity, or what a thing is, and this too on rational grounds. For his aim was to form syllogisms, and we know that quiddity is a first principle of syllogisms, for dialectical strength not as yet had at that time any existence, so that they were able, even without the possession of quiddity, or the substance of a thing, to institute inquiries into those things that are contraries, even though we should suppose that there would be the same science of contraries. For there are two improvements in science which one might justly ascribe to Socrates. Now I allude to his employment of inductive arguments, and his definition of the universal, for both of these belong to a science that is conversant about a first principle. Socrates, however, did not, it is true, constitute universals as things involving a separable subsistence, nor did he regard the definitions as such. The other philosophers, however, invested them with a separate subsistence, and, in addition, they denominated things of this sort as the ideas of entities. Wherefore it occurred to them, almost for the same reason, that there exist ideas of all things which are predicated universally, and this assumption is just as if one desirous of reckoning a particular sum, when in fact the component parts were fewer in number, should consider it an impossibility to do so, but when he had made them more numerous, should succeed in counting them. For more numerous, so to say, are forms than singulars that fall under the notice of sense. From an investigation into the causes of which did these speculators advance from sensibles to ideas. For a form is a thing that is of the same import with a sensible singular, and it subsists independent of substances. And forms are there in the case of many other things, namely, both in these particular things and in those that are eternal. Further, in the modes in which it is demonstrated that forms exist, according to none of these is it apparent that they really do exist. For from some of them it is not necessary that a syllogism should arise, but from certain others, and in the case of things where they do not suppose that there are forms in existence, of these are there generated forms. For, according to the rational principles that may be adduced from the other sciences, there will subsist forms of all things of whatsoever there are sciences, and according to the notion of the unity that is involved in plurality, will there subsist forms also of negations, and according to the perception of something belonging to what has been corrupted, will there be forms of things subject to corruption, for of these is there a certain impression on the mind. But further, with respect to the most accurate of the arguments that have been brought forward in favour of the ideal theory, certain speculators, no doubt, make ideas to belong to relatives of which they do not affirm that there is an essential genus, whereas others assert the existence of a third man. and in general the arguments concerning forms overturn the very things which those persons who maintain the existence of these forms would desire to exist, in preference to the existence of the forms themselves. For it happens that the duad is not first, but that the number is, and prior to this is that which is relative, and that which involves an essential subsistence is prior to, and this will be the case with all those things whatsoever which certain philosophers in their adherence to these opinions respecting forms have put forward in opposition to first principles. Further, according indeed to that supposition by which these speculators affirm the existence of ideas, not only will there be forms of substances, but of many other things besides. For there is not only the one concept about substances, but also concerning those things that are not substances, and there will be systems of scientific knowledge conversant not about substances merely. But there are innumerable other consequences that ensue unto this hypothesis, in accordance, however, with what is necessary, and with the opinions that are prevalent concerning the ideal theory. On the supposition that the forms are participants, it is expedient that there should be ideas of substances merely. For these do not participate according to what is accidental, but it is requisite that they should participate of each thing so far forth as there doth not exist a predication of it of a subject. Now, I say, for example, if anything participates of the twofold itself, this also participates of what is everlasting, but according to accident, for it is an accident for the twofold to be everlasting. Wherefore, forms will constitute substance, and these here and there are in their signification equivalent to substance. Or can we say that there is any existence of anything independent of these? Take the case, for instance, of the notion of unity involved in that of plurality. And surely, if one establish that there is the same form of the ideas as of those things that are participants of them, there will subsist something that is in common to both. For why, may I ask, in the case of corruptible duads, and of duads that are many, I admit, in number yet everlasting, why, I say, in the case of these, is the duad one and the same thing, rather than in the case both of this and a certain particular duad? If, however, there is not the same form of these, the result would be that entities would be homonymous, and the case would be just as if one should call both Callias and a piece of wood a man, though at the same time unable to discern any point of communion between them. If, however, we shall establish that other things, now I mean common reasons, are capable of adaptation to the forms, as for instance a plane figure to the circle itself, as well as the other portions or the definitions of the circle, and if that also to which it belongs will be annexed in addition, if all this be done, we ought to institute an inquiry as to whether or not this may be entirely an ineffectual proceeding. For also, to what, it may be asked, will the addition be made, whether to the centre, or to the surface, or to all the parts? For all things that are involved in substance constitute ideas, for instance animal and biped. Further, it is evident that it is necessary that a thing itself should be something, in the same way as a surface must be some nature or other which will be inherent in all the forms, as is the case with the genus. End of Chapter 4 of Book 12. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 5 of Book 12 of Metaphysics by Aristotle. Translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 5. But, most especially, might one raise the question as to what at all it is that forms contribute either to the things that are eternal amongst those that fall under the notice of our senses, or to things that are being generated and corrupted. For neither are these a cause to them of any motion, or of any change whatever. But, certainly, neither do these forms render any assistance towards the advancement of the science of other things, for neither are those the substance of these, for in such a case they would be inherent in them, nor do they contribute to the existence of anything at all, inasmuch as they are not at least inherent in those things that are participants, for if they were so, they might perhaps seem to be equivalent with causes, as in the case of what is white when it has been mixed with what is white. But undoubtedly may this reason be very easily overturned, a tenet to be sure which Anaxagoras in the first instance, and subsequently to his age Eudoxus, and certain other speculators from time to time, maintained whilst labouring under doubts. The theory itself, however, I say, is capable of refutation, for it would be easy to collect together many antagonistic arguments, as well as many impossible consequences, in reference to such an opinion. But the fact is, that neither do other things subsist from the forms according to any of the modes which are accustomed to be put forward by the advocates of the ideal hypothesis. And the assertion that ideas are models or exemplars, and that other things participate in these, is to speak quite at random, and to assert what is tantamount with mere poetic metaphors. For what, allow me to ask, is that which operates, having an eye, so to say, or looking towards the ideas? For anything whatsoever admits of coming into existence, and of being generated, and yet there is no consequent necessity that it should be a thing that is modelled after some form or image, so that even though we should suppose Socrates to exist, and not to exist, there yet would be generated some such thing as Socrates actually is. And in like manner is it evident that this would be the case even though Socrates were eternal. Also will there subsist many paradigms or models of the same thing, so that this will hold good of the forms likewise, as in the instance of man. Animal and biped will subsist as forms in conjunction also with ideal man. Further, not only will the forms constitute the paradigms of sensibles, but also those of themselves, as genus might be regarded a paradigm of species that are generic. Wherefore the exemplar and the image will be the same thing. Further, it would appear an impossibility that substance, and that to which the substance belongs, should be separate. Wherefore, how would ideas which are said to constitute the substances of things involve a separable subsistence? In the Phaedo, however, is an assertion made to this effect, I mean, to the effect that forms are the causes both of existence and of generation. Nevertheless, on the supposition of the existence of these forms, entities, notwithstanding, are not being produced, if also there should not subsist something that is likely to be an efficient cause. And to this we may add that different other things are generated, as a house and a ring, of which they do not say that there are forms at all. Wherefore it is evident that those things also, of which these advocates of the ideal theory say that there are ideas, may both exist and be generated on account of such causes as we may consider the things also to be that have been just now mentioned, but not on account of forms. But, certainly, as far as regards the subject of the ideal hypothesis, it is possible, both in the manner now adopted, as well as by means of arguments that are more logical and accurate, to collect together many similar points with those that already have been made subjects of inquiry. Chapter 6. Now, since we have thus far arrived at some settlement of the controversy concerning these upholders of the ideal theory, it is well once more to examine into the consequences in respect of numbers that happen in the systems of those who assert that they are substances that involve a separable subsistence, and the primary causes of entities. It is necessary, however, on the supposition that number constitutes a certain nature, and that there is not any other substance of it, but this very thing, as certain affirm. It is, I say, undoubtedly necessary, in this case, that something belonging to it should be classed as what is primary, whereas that something as consequential to this be in every instance different in form. And this directly resides either in monads, and then every monad whatsoever is incapable of comparison with any monad whatsoever, or all of these are directly in order consequent, and any whatsoever are comparable with any monads whatsoever, as scientific men affirm to be the case with mathematical number. For in mathematical number there is no difference as regards any monad one from another, or shall we say that, as far as the monads are concerned, that some of them are capable of comparison with one another, whereas some are not? Just as if the first duad were to subsist after unity, and next in order the triad, and so therefore another number. But the monads in each number are capable of being compared one with another, as the monads contained in the first duad are with themselves, and those in the first triad with themselves, and so therefore is it in the case of the rest of the numbers. Those monads, however, that are contained in the duad itself are incapable of comparison with those that are contained in the triad itself, and the case is the same with the other consecutive numbers. Wherefore also the mathematician reckons 2 after the 1, along with the one before, another 1, and after the numeration of the 3, in addition to these 2, he subjoins another 1, and the rest in like manner. But this philosopher, I mean Plato, after the 1 reckons 2 others without the first one, and the triad without the duad, and the case stands the same with the other number. Or shall we say that one sort of numbers should subsist as that which has been mentioned first, but another such as the mathematicians put forward, and a third which has been spoken of as last? Further, it is evident that these numbers are either separable from things or are not separable, but are resident in objects that fall under the notice of our senses, yet not in these in such a manner as we have considered at the first, but as subsisting in sensibles through inherent numbers, or at any rate one kind of these must have a subsistence thus, and another not so, or all of them must exist thus. The modes indeed, therefore, according to which it is possible that these should exist are necessarily only these. In general, however, those philosophers who affirm unity to be a first principle, and a substance and element of all things, and that number derives its existence from this, and from a certain other one, almost each of them has declared his adherence to some one of these modes, with the exception of that one where all the monads are assumed as being incapable of comparison one with another. And this has happened consistently with rational principles, for it is not admissible that there should be further another mode of the subsistence of number beside those that have been enumerated. Some therefore assert that both are numbers, and that one of these modes, which involves what is antecedent and what is subsequent, accords with ideas, but that mathematical number is different from ideas and sensibles, and that both ideas and mathematical number possess a separable subsistence from sensibles, whereas others assert that mathematical number only it is that is the original of entities, and that it has been actually separated from sensibles. And the Pythagoreans say that there exists the mathematical unit, but not one which has been separated, but they affirm that sensible substances consist from this. For the entire heaven they construct out of numbers, with the exception of those that are not monadic numbers, but they suppose that the monads involve magnitude. Yet as to how the first unit consists, possessed of magnitude, they seem to be involved in perplexity. A certain other philosopher, however, affirms that the first number is that one which ranks amongst forms, and others say that mathematical number is this first number. And in like manner also is it the case in regard both of lengths and surfaces. and in regard of solids. For some say that those which are mathematical are different from those that subsist after ideas. But in the case of those who say otherwise, some, it is true, speak of mathematical natures even mathematically, as many, I mean, as do not constitute the ideas as numbers, or say that the ideas exist. But others speak of the mathematical number, yet not mathematically, however. For what they maintain is this, that neither is every magnitude divided into magnitudes, nor that any monads whatsoever can compose a duad. All speculators, however, with the exception of such of the Pythagorics as assert that unity constitutes, as it may be said, an element and first principle of entities, seek to establish the dogma that numbers partake of the nature of monads. Yet those undoubtedly speak of monads as involving magnitude, as has been stated previously. In what number of ways it is admissible, therefore, that statements should have been made respecting numbers, and that all such methods have been enumerated, is evident from these foregoing assertions. All these assertions, however, are, to be sure, impossible, but perhaps one more than another. Chapter 7. In the first place, then, we must examine whether monads are capable of mutual comparison, or are incapable of such comparison, and on the supposition of their being incapable of comparison, whether they are to be viewed in the manner that we have divided. For indeed it is possible that any monad whatsoever should not admit of being compared with any whatsoever. And it is possible that those monads that are resident in the actual duad should not be capable of a comparison with those that are in the actual triad, and so therefore that those be incapable of comparison with one another which are contained in each primary number. If, therefore, all the monads are capable of comparison, and devoid of any mutual difference, mathematical number, and one number alone, come into being, and it is not admissible that ideas should constitute number. For what sort of a number will an ideal man be, or an ideal animal, or any other species whatsoever? For there is one idea of each, as one idea of man himself, and of animal itself there is another one. Numbers, however, that are similar, and devoid of difference, are infinite. Wherefore, in no respect will this triad constitute ideal man more than any other one whatever. On the supposition, however, that the ideas are not numbers, neither is it possible that these exist at all. For from what first principles, may I ask, will the ideas be derived? For number is derivable from unity, and the duad, which is indefinite, and these are said to be the first principles and the elements of number, and it is not admissible to arrange them in classes, either as prior or subsequent to numbers. If, however, monads are incapable of comparison, and incapable of comparison after this mode, so that everything whatever is different from everything whatever, neither is it admissible that this can constitute mathematical number. For, in fact, mathematical number is derived from monads which are devoid of difference, and things that are demonstrated thereby are found to harmonize with monads of this description. Nor yet can this number belong to forms, for the first duad will not be derived from unity and the indefinite duad. In the next place, the consecutive numbers, as it is affirmed, are duad, triad, tetrad. For at the same time are the monads produced which are contained in the first duad, whether after the same manner as the philosopher was for maintaining who first made the assertion of their subsistence from unequal monads, for from things reduced to a state of equality they have been actually produced, or whether they have a subsistence in another way. In the next place, on the supposition that there will be one monad that is prior to another, it will also be prior to the duad that is derived from these. For in case of the subsistence of anything, there is something prior, and something subsequent. Likewise will that which subsists from these be a thing that is antecedent to the one, but subsequent to the other. Further, whereas this actual unity is first, then doth there belong a certain first unit to the others, and a second after that, and again a third. There will be a second, of course, after the second, and a third after the first one. Wherefore the monads would be antecedent to the numbers of which they are composed, as, to give an instance, in the duad there will reside a third monad antecedent to the existence of the number 3, and in the triad a fourth, and in the tetrad a fifth, before the existence of these numbers. No one, indeed, therefore, of these aforesaid philosophers hath asserted that the monads are incapable of comparison after this mode. But, in accordance, to be sure, with the principles of those speculators, it is reasonable that the case should be even so, though, according to reality, such is impossible. For also, that monads should be prior and subsequent is reasonable enough, provided there may be in existence both a certain first monad and first unit, and that in like manner also this should be the case in regard of duads, on the supposition that there is a first duad likewise. For, after that which is first, it is rational and necessary that there should be a something that is second, and if a something that is second, a third, and so therefore of the rest in order. At the same time, however, to assert the existence of both, even the existence of a first monad, and of a second after unity, and of a first duad, this is impossible. But they introduce a monad, I admit, and a first one, but no longer do they bring forward a second and a third, and they introduce a first duad, but no longer do they bring forward a second and a third. But it is evident also that such is not admissible on the supposition that all the monads are incapable of comparison. I mean, that an actual duad and a triad, and so the other numbers, should have a subsistence. For whether the monads be devoid of difference, and whether they are severally different one from another, it is necessary that number be reckoned according to addition, as for instance the duad by the addition of one to another one, and the triad by the addition of another one to the two, and the tetrad in like manner. Inasmuch as these things, however, are so, it is impossible that there should be a generation of numbers after this mode, that is, in the same manner as certain speculators generate them from the duad and from unity. For the duad becomes a portion of the triad, and the triad of the tetrad, and in the same manner does it happen in the case of those numbers also that follow next in order. But from the first duad, and from the duad that is indefinite, is formed the tetrad, being two duads in addition to the actual duad. But on the supposition that the actual duad is not a portion, there will exist still another single duad, and the duad will be derived from unity itself, and another one. And if this be the case, it is not possible that also an indefinite duad should constitute the other element, for it produces one monad, but not a definite duad. Further, beside the actual triad and the actual duad, how, may I ask, will there exist other triads and duads, and in what manner are they compounded of prior and subsequent monads? For all these assumptions are even fictitious, and it is impossible that there be a first duad, then an actual triad, and it would be necessary that this should be the case on the supposition that unity and the indefinite duad will constitute elements of numbers. If, however, consequences that are impossibilities ensue, it is likewise impossible that these should be first principles. If indeed, therefore, the monads are different, any one whatsoever from any one whatsoever, these and such other results necessarily ensue. But if the monads that are resident in another number are different, and others that are inherent in the same number are alone devoid of any such mutual difference, even in this case not a whit the less do consequences ensue that are attended with difficulty. As, for instance, in the decade itself are involved 10 monads, and the decade is composed both of these and of 2 pentads. Since, however, the decade itself is not an ordinary number, and since it is not compounded of ordinary pentads, as neither of ordinary monads, it is necessary that the monads should involve a mutual difference, I mean those that are contained in this decade. For if they do not involve this difference, neither will the pentads be different of which the decade is composed. Yet, since they do involve this difference, the monads likewise will differ. And on the supposition that they differ, whether does it follow that there will not be inherent different other pentads, but merely those two, or that there will be inherent such? And if we do not suppose this to be the case, namely, that they will be inherent, it is absurd. Or, if they will be inherent, what sort will be the decade that is composed of those? For there is not another decade resident in the decade beside itself. But assuredly also it is necessary that the tetrad, at any rate, be not compounded of the ordinary or casual duads. For the indefinite duad, as they say, receiving the definite duad, has produced two duads, for it causes the duad it has received to become two. Further, the existence beside the two monads of the duad as a certain nature, and of the triad beside the three monads, how, may I ask, is such admissible? For one will either partake of the other, as a white man beside white and man, for he partakes of these, or will do so when the one amounts to a certain difference of the other, as man beside animal and biped. Further, some things are one in contact, and others by mixture, and others by position, not one of which is it admissible should be inherent in the monads from which the duad and the triad are compounded. But just as two men are not one certain thing beside both, so it is necessary also that the case should stand with the monads. And they will not be said to differ because they are indivisible, for on this account also are points indivisible. But nevertheless the duad of them will not be anything different from the two. But undoubtedly neither should this escape our notice, that it happens that there will exist prior and subsequent duads, and in like manner doth the case stand with the rest of the numbers. For indeed, even allowing the duads to rank in the tetrad, one along with another, yet these are antecedent to those in the octade, and they themselves have produced, as the duad has these, the tetrads that are contained in the octade itself, so that if, also, the first duad be an idea, these likewise will constitute certain ideas. And there is the same reasoning applicable to the case of the monads also. For the monads in the first duad produced the four monads that are in the tetrad. Wherefore all the monads become ideas, and an idea will be compounded of ideas. Wherefore it is evident that those things of which the ideas themselves happen to be compounded will be composite natures, just as if one were to say that animals are compounded of animals. If there are ideas of these, ideas will be compounded of animals. And in general, to make monads to involve a mutual difference of any kind whatsoever would be an absurd and fictitious supposition. Now, I mean by fictitious a thing that is forcibly contrived so as to suit a particular hypothesis. For neither according to quantity, nor according to quality, do we see a monad differing from a monad, and it is requisite that every number should be either equal or unequal, but particularly that which is monadic. Wherefore, if it be neither greater nor less, it will be equal. But things that are equal, and, in short, devoid of mutual difference, we consider to be the same in numbers. And if this be not admitted, neither will there be in this decade duads that are without a difference, seeing that they are equal. For what cause will one be able to bring forward who makes the assertion that they are devoid of this mutual difference? Moreover, if every monad and another monad make two, a monad which is taken from the duad itself, and the duad which is taken from the triad itself, will be derived from monads that are different. And the question may be put as to whether this duad will be antecedent to the triad, or subsequent to it. But there appears to exist a greater necessity for its being antecedent. For the one subsists along with a triad, and the other along with a duad of monads. And we, indeed, in general, are inclined to adopt the supposition that 1 and 1 are 2, even whether they may be equal or unequal, as, for instance, what is good and what is evil, and man and horse. They who make assertions in this way do not make these assertions of the monads, however. But if the number belonging to the triad itself be not a greater number than that belonging to the duad, it is astonishing, or, on the supposition of its being greater, it is evident that there is an equal number also in the duad. Wherefore, this will be without a difference from the duad itself. This, however, does not admit of taking place if there is a certain first number and a second number, neither will the ideas be numbers. For this very assertion do they correctly make who think that the monads should involve mutual differences, since they will constitute ideas, as has been previously stated, for the subject of both will be one form. But if the monads do not involve this difference, both the duads and the triads will be indifferent likewise. Wherefore, to the authors of this assertion, it is necessary to say that in counting 1, 2, in this way, we must not, beside what is previously existing, make any additional assumption of anything, for neither will there subsist generation from the indefinite duad, nor is it possible that an idea can exist, for there will be one idea inherent in another, and all forms will be parts of one. Wherefore, consistently, I admit, with their hypothesis do they make their assertions, yet upon the whole they do not make their assertions even consistently with their hypothesis. For they overturn many things, since they are likely to say that this itself at least involves a certain doubt, namely, whether, when we count and say 1, 2, 3, we additionally assume anything in counting, or whether we carry on our reckoning according to parts. We do so, however, in both cases. Wherefore it would be ridiculous to reduce this into so great a difference of substance. End of Chapter 7 of Book 12. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.